What's going on, guys? I'm here with my MCU tier list. This is going to take a while. I got all the movies and all the TV shows in here. I rearranged them to be in release order because, once again, whoever made this had them in some kind of random order. So I got every tier from S, which means like super, I think. I'm pretty new at tier list, but I think that's what it means. A, B, C, D, E, F. So I'm going to rate, based on my opinion, obviously, all these movies on this list and then also rank them at the end. Guys, I'm going to try to get this all in one take. We'll see if that happens. If I do any editing, some of you who aren't in this space might not even realize, but some of you definitely will. But since this is so long, I'm going to do the best I can to get this in one take and probably not do a ton of editing. So let's get this thing started. Iron Man, the one that started it all, that's going to go on the A tier for me. This movie's fucking awesome and still holds up today. I think it has maybe even gotten better throughout the days. I mean, sure, it's gotten outclassed a bit as far as scale and stakes and everything by Infinity War and Endgame. And it seems a little quaint by today's standards, but it's a very good movie. Iron Man is awesome. It's one of my favorite origin stories of all time. Definitely my favorite origin story on this entire list, to be honest. So it goes on the A tier. Robert Downey Jr. is perfect for Iron Man. He was born to play this role, basically playing himself, and it works perfectly. I actually prefer Terrence Howard as War Machine, Rhodey. I think Obadiah Stane is a great villain, although they maybe should have kept him for another movie. I think they got rid of him too early, and that third act battle was a little bit underwhelming, and it left me feeling a little cold. Other than that, the movie's great. The actual ending, when he announces that he's Iron Man, is great. Tony's character arc in this movie, where he goes from the carefree playboy to the guy who realizes, wait, my weapons are doing really bad things, and I need to stop doing this. I need to get this figured out and make sure my weapons stop getting into the wrong hands. So very, very good movie. Lots of humor. It flows. The pacing is very good. Awesome origin story. The Incredible Hulk, I'm going to put on the E tier. Sorry, guys. I know a lot of you think this movie's underrated and you enjoy it. I just don't. To me, forgettable describes this movie perfectly. I can't really remember much about it. Ed Norton is actually good as Bruce Banner and Hulk. That's my favorite part of the movie. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened if they kept him in the role instead of replacing him with Mark Ruffalo. Aside from that, everything else in the movie is pretty dull. The action scenes were fine. I just didn't really feel any weight to them. The production design was weird. It kind of looked like a TV movie. And then the story just never gripped me. I don't remember anything about this movie. Betty Ross, played by Liv Tyler, I don't know if it was her fault or the directing or the writing, but she was horrible in this movie. But I know her to be a good actress, so it must have been something else. Must have been directing or writing, but I absolutely hated her character. She annoyed the piss out of me. The final fight with Abomination's kind of cool, but also kind of hard to tell what's going on. Plus, nothing that happens in this movie has any ramifications for anything in the future of the MCU, or at least so far. Just overall movie I don't really care for, and to be honest, I rewatched it a couple years ago in preparation for Endgame, and I wasn't even sure if I'd seen it already. And now, after watching it again, that makes sense, because it's extremely forgettable to me. I don't really have a ton to say about it. It's going on the E tier. It doesn't really have a tone. It's not that it's too dark for the MCU. It just doesn't have a tone. It's not light. It's not dark. It's just dull. Like, it's very... I had a very hard time getting into this movie whatsoever. Iron Man 2, I actually liked a little bit more than Incredible Hulk. It's going on the D tier. It's going on D tier. Whew, this movie's frustrating. I think there is a lot to like about it. I think Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr., Tony Stark is great again. He might be even better in this movie than he was in the first. He might be even Tony Starky, more Starky than he was in the first one, with the quips and everything. All that was great. I actually really love Sam Rockwell in this movie. I really hope they bring his character back, and that's someone I've been waiting for, because he's still alive. He's out there somewhere in the MCU. His dancing scene is awesome. Sam Rockwell kills every single role he's in. Can't wait to see him again if they end up bringing him back. But the movie's a mess. There are way too many plot lines. There is the Whiplash plot line. There's the Justin Hammer plot line. There's the Avengers setup. There's the Tony's dad issues. There's Tony with his health issues and that he's dying and trying to find a new element. Way too many things to juggle within one movie, and it's well known that Jon Favreau wanted another year to make the script. They didn't let him. They had to get this movie out for the sake of the Avengers. It doesn't ruin anything in the franchise. And I guess if it was best for the rest of the universe, it was okay that they rushed this movie. It doesn't really hurt anything. But what ends up happening for this movie itself is it's very, very messy and disjointed. Even though I enjoy it when I watch it, there's a lot to enjoy in it. Everything with Robert Downey Jr. and Sam Rockwell is great. I enjoy Nick Fury. The Whiplash stuff, didn't really care for at all. But it's a very, very disappointing and frustrating movie, even though I do have a fun time with it.
Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to exit the donut.
Thor, I'm going to put on the C tier. I enjoy Thor enough. By the way, guys, I'm going to get into spoilers for all these movies. I already slightly did, but most of these are old enough. Even No Way Home, I'm going to get into spoilers for, so just a fair warning. I'll probably warn you again before I talk about that movie. But Thor, to me, is kind of a tale of two movies. I love everything on Asgard with Thor and Loki and Odin. Thor and Loki's brotherly rivalry. Loki finding out that he is a frost giant, feeling betrayed, and then Odin going into the Odin sleep and Loki taking over. I do like the frost giants, although I wish they would have done a little bit more with them. I think it's an interesting design, interesting idea. I like Laufey. I like his design and voice. I hope we see them again at some point. I doubt we will, but I thought they were cool. Just could use them a little bit better. Everything on Earth was pretty bad. There was a little bit of fun humor there with the fish out of water stuff, but I don't buy Thor and Jane's relationship at all. Even though I do end up liking Darcy in WandaVision, she's very annoying in this. Selvig doesn't really do much for me. All the science talk, all that. Very, very boring. Don't really care for any of that. But definitely, I enjoy the Warriors 3 and Lady Sif. Everything to do with Asgard and everything that goes on there, great. Everything on Earth, not very good. The third act is very underwhelming. There isn't really a constant sense of conflict. There's not really much momentum throughout a big part of this movie. Who's the main villain? It kind of ends up being Loki, but then the final fight there is underwhelming, and then the fight with the Destroyer is underwhelming. Just a movie that certainly could have been a lot better, but I enjoy it for what it is. First Avenger, kind of on the edge with this one between B and C. I'm going to put it on C, slightly ahead of Thor. This movie is also one that I do enjoy and recommend, but it's a little bit frustrating for me. I feel like the pacing is weird. I do not like the montage whatsoever. They montage through World War II, which is very frustrating. And I also hate Skinny Cap. It is very, very off-putting and jarring to me. I've never liked that, and I don't hear people talk about this enough, but that's something that it doesn't... They hadn't quite figured out the deep fake kind of uncanny CGI back then. They hadn't quite gotten there to where they are now with like de-aging Nick Fury and stuff. And it looks very weird when you watch it again now. Everything else I love for the most part, although I did feel like the Bucky friendship was a little bit underdeveloped to where when you get the reveal in Winter Soldier, that was a little bit underwhelming, even though I think they end up developing that better as it goes along. We didn't get as much of that as I wanted in this movie. You buy it, but you feel like they should have had to earn it a little bit more. I love the romance with Peggy Carter and what ends up happening with that later on, which I'll talk about. Cool action, and I like Cap as a character. I think he's a great character. He gets a little bit more development. It's fleshed out a little bit more in the other movies, but I like what he stands for and his morals, and the scene between him and the Doctor where he's like, I don't want to kill anyone, I just don't like bullies. Great stuff. The ending is very sad, and you think at the time that that's probably the end for Steve and Peggy, even though, again, we'll touch on that. But I enjoy the first Avenger. It's certainly not a great movie. I think the other two Captain America movies are much better, but I think it's a solid one. So I'll put it on the very top end of the C tier. It's kind of between like a C plus and B minus. The first Avengers movie is going to go on the A tier. I'll put it ahead of Iron Man. Barely. The first Avengers movie is awesome. And it doesn't feel as amazing as it did when it first came out, because I think Infinity War and Endgame have surpassed it by a long shot. It's still a very, very good movie. The first time seeing these characters on screen was really cool. Their banter is great. This movie probably has the best banter and dialogue, inner character dialogue of all the movies on this list, so I really enjoyed that. Loki is a great villain, one of the best villains in the entire MCU, and you feel the threat of him in this movie, and there's a little bit hint of Thanos as well that's behind the whole thing, which I really enjoyed. Certainly, there are aspects of it that date a little bit. The production value isn't great, and the pacing isn't the best. But other than that, I mean, the third act is phenomenal. Some of the best action on this list, and it was the first time they're fighting this big CGI army. Makes it, in my opinion, the best time they do it, because they've repeated that a lot. But it was really cool seeing them all fight together for the first time. And I just really enjoy this movie every time I watch it, even though I think some people might put it a little bit higher than it should be. Iron Man 3, this is going on the F tier, guys. I know this one's very divisive. I know a lot of you love this movie, and to a certain extent, I can understand why. I can't stand Iron Man 3. I think it's terrible. I think there were some potentially interesting ideas that were being explored in the beginning with, like, Tony's PTSD and his mental health issues, and then the conversations with the kid, and the setup for the Mandarin. All that was cool. I was into it for a while. Then you get the Mandarin twist, which I cannot stand. And people defend it. I hate it. There is nothing you can do to convince me that was a good direction to take this movie. I think it is one of the dumbest things on this entire list. Probably the dumbest decision made in the entire MCU, to be honest. And I'm not even a comic book fan. I know a lot of people say, well, comic book fans won't like the Mandarin twist. If you're not a comic book fan, you probably won't care. No, I hated it. I couldn't stand it. It didn't make sense within the movie. It was the dumbest thing ever. Not just because of how stupid they made the character, but also they trade in a potentially really cool and interesting and menacing villain in the Mandarin and trade him in for a lame, generic villain in Killian, who has a backstory that we've seen a million times with Syndrome and Riddler and Batman Forever and Electro in the Amazing Spider-Man 2. We've seen this so many times, and it's gotten so stale by this point, and I really hate when they do that storyline. You know, the guy gets scorned by the hero, and then or gets blown off by the hero, whatever, and now he hates him and is resentful and becomes a villain because of it. Now goes after the hero. That's just not interesting to me anymore, and it really never was. I think they did it pretty well in The Incredibles, but didn't like it here. Killian just becomes a very lame, generic villain. He kidnaps the president for whatever reason, I'm not entirely sure. Everything that happens after the Mandarin twist is terrible. I couldn't stand it. And I hate the Extremis plotline. I think it's really dumb. The Super Pepper stuff was dumb. I think it would have been more interesting. Maybe she stayed dead there. Could have been an interesting arc for Tony. Didn't like this movie at all. Hated it when it came out. I gave it another shot a few years ago, and I hated it just as much. I was wondering why. I was like halfway through, I'm like, this isn't too bad. And then the Mandarin twist happened. I'm like, oh, and then everything happens after that. I'm like, oh, this is why I hate this movie. It's staying on the F tier. It'll probably never move. I can get why people like this movie. Just not for me.
Well, I wouldn't go in there for 20 minutes.
All right, next is going to be Thor: The Dark World. That is going to go on either E or D. That's going to go on the E tier as well, ahead of Incredible Hulk. This movie's not good. It's also, this is like the forgettable tier for me. Like, if a movie's so bad that I hate it, it's going to go on the F tier. If it's just really forgettable, it's the E tier. I don't remember a ton about this movie. All I remember is Malekith is probably the lamest villain on this entire list. I know that the Thor and Loki stuff is cool, but they fake Loki's death again, which I hate when they do that. The Jane stuff again sucks. Everything on Earth with Darcy and Darcy's intern. What the hell was that? Some of the dumbest shit on this entire list. Selvig running around naked. Just a lot of weird shit. Very tonally inconsistent. Doesn't really know what it wants to be. There's one cool action scene at the beginning and some cool stuff with Lady Sif and the Warriors 3 again. Although they end up being underused throughout this entire Thor trilogy. The mom dying was a nice, heartwarming moment. It was heartbreaking, but it was also heartwarming because it ends up bringing Loki and Thor together. That was a great moment. And then everything else, just kind of whatever. Malekith as a villain, his plan, what he's trying to do. I still don't really remember to this day what exactly he's trying to do. Very strange. Didn't really care for the central conflict at all, and I found myself looking at my phone a lot while watching this movie, and that's never a good sign. Winter Soldier is going... This is going to be the first movie on the S tier. Winter Soldier is fucking incredible. I remember in 2014, I have a lot of fond memories of watching this movie, because the first one is... Seeing this movie in theaters was the first time I ever sat in recliners. And I was so surprised. I'm like, oh, you pick your seat. It was both seat selection and recliners. They turned the screen around like, oh, pick your seats. I'm like, what? Never done this before. We got in there. There's the recliners. Like, holy shit, this is really cool. And the movie was awesome. I was only a casual MCU fan up to this point. Once I saw this movie, I was all in. I'm like, holy shit. This can be, like, seriously good. This isn't just goofy, fun comic book movies. These movies can just be great movies, and that's what Winter Soldier is. It's a spy thriller with a great story, a great character arc for Captain America. This is by far the most interesting he's been so far up to this point in the MCU when it came out. He has a great arc. He kind of has to rethink his whole philosophy about always following orders and the government, and he realizes that the government's flawed and it's corrupt, and he shouldn't follow orders all the time. And it kind of leads him down the path what leads to Civil War and later down the line. Great stuff. I love his dynamic with Black Widow. I love his dynamic with Sam Wilson. His introduction was good. Nick Fury was cool, even though one of my only nitpicks with the movie is I didn't like the fake death. I wish he would stop doing the damn fake death. And then the villain, excuse me, the villain, Alexander Pierce, played by Robert Redford, was great. I think he's an underrated villain. People just say he's a typical, like, Nazi guy, and that's kind of true. But Robert Redford plays him so good that it makes him interesting. It makes him compelling. And he's one of the better villains on this list. Also, you get the soldier villain in Bucky, who, again, when the reveal happens, I think it was slightly underwhelming, but they, within the universe, make you buy it. And then what ends up happening in the end, great stuff. I also, the action was phenomenal. Great action, some of the best hand-to-hand action in the entire MCU by far. Such a thrill from start to finish, and this one changed the game for the MCU. Speaking of changing the game, Guardians of the Galaxy is going on the A tier, ahead of Avengers. Because the first Guardians movie is fucking awesome. When I heard about this movie, I'm like, what the hell? I don't understand what they're doing with this. They're going to be a talking tree and talking raccoon. This is going to be the MCU's first flop, at least financially. Because I thought Iron Man 3 was a flop. I'm like, I can't believe, what the hell are they doing? I saw a trailer, I'm like, oh, this looks really weird. And I actually didn't see it in theaters. And I heard people talking about it for a while before I actually watched it. I'm like, this is amazing. I can't believe how fun and clever and funny this movie is. So fresh and so different from the rest of the MCU. You really, really love all these characters, and they work so great as a team, but they're also great as their own characters. My only issue with this movie really is the villain, which is Ronan. I think he's a very generic, over-the-top villain, and I didn't like him at all. I also didn't really like Nebula in this movie. I think Karen Gillan way overacted at the start of that character, but she gets way better as the franchise goes along, which I'll get to. The soundtrack is phenomenal. One of the soundtracks from any movie that I listen to the most. Just so much fun from start to finish, and I enjoy these characters so damn much. This is a movie that I can watch over and over. Age of Ultron, I think, is severely underrated. I think it's going on the B tier. I think most of the criticisms this movie gets are ridiculous, and I don't really understand the hate for this movie. A lot of the issues people throw at this movie, I think, don't make any sense. It's not perfect, of course. It's flawed. They said it's a trailer for future MCU projects. I think with the Thor bathtub scene, that's true, but everything else, I feel like, fits a narrative. And I like Ultron as a villain. I think he could have been better if he would have been a little bit more menacing and less sarcastic and humorous like Tony, although that kind of makes sense, and I also kind of enjoyed that. You get a little bit of Claw, which I love Claw as a character. We get Hawkeye's family life, which some people didn't love. I thought it was fine. I like showing that side of him. We get the introduction of Wanda and Pietro. Pietro gets killed. Wanda ends up having a great arc in the entire MCU, and I think this was so there's going to be more to that, but so far she has. This is a great introduction to her. This also kind of starts planting the seeds of, hostility between Steve and Tony with their disagreements on things, which they end up touching on a lot more in Civil War, which leads to the conflict there. I think there might be some deeper emotions and more fleshed out character arcs in this movie than there were in the first Avengers. But certainly Ultron is not as good of a villain as Loki, and it is a little bit disjointed at times, and the Thor bathtub scene is very distracting. But overall, I think this movie is vastly, vastly underrated. And I think it is probably the most underrated movie on this list, and I get a lot of enjoyment out of it every time I watch it. Ant-Man's also going on the B tier, below Age of Ultron. I enjoy the hell out of Ant-Man. It's exactly what it wants to be. It certainly kind of follows the MCU formula. It kind of feels like a repeat of the first Iron Man, even with the villain, with Corey Stoll's character. Feels like kind of like a copy of Obadiah Stane. But the movie is so funny and so enjoyable, and Scott Lang, played by Paul Rudd, is such a fun character. Love Michael Douglas in the movie as well. Michael Pena is unironically one of my favorite characters in the entire MCU. He's hilarious, and the way he tells his stories, some of the funniest stuff in the entire MCU. Just a blast from start to finish. It's a movie that's not going for the big, huge battles, the big, huge stakes, the world's going to end, stuff like that. It's not that. It knows what it is, and it delivered exactly what it wanted to. Civil War is the second movie going down the S tier, putting it ahead of Winter Soldier. This movie's fucking great. I remember seeing it in theaters and being blown away. Like, holy shit, that was amazing. It's maybe even a little bit better than Winter Soldier, same directors, which is not a coincidence. I think it's a little bit better because it has more emotional weight to things that are going on. The action might not quite be as great, even though there's some great action here as well. The airport fight is awesome. The fight at the end between Bucky, Steve, and Tony might have been even better after the revelation that Bucky killed Tony's parents, which was a very chilling scene, and I didn't really put it together until they showed the date. It's like, oh, I know that route. Oh, no! I put it together right before I saw it. I'm like, holy shit. I think I said out loud in the theater, holy shit. And my friend next to me is like, what? I'm like, Bucky killed Tony's parents. It's like, oh, wow. The way that all came together, even though the logistics of that don't really make sense, the logistics of Zemo's plan, I defend that compared to some people. I defend it more than some people do. I think it's not nearly as bad as some people make it out to be. Just because this is the way we saw his plan play out doesn't mean it's the only plan he had. So I think Zemo's actually a really good villain. We get more of him later. I think he's underrated, one of the better MCU villains. I love the conflict between Steve and Tony and what starts it and then what kind of leads to it at the end. I think they both make some very good points, and it's a great debate when they're in the room just talking about should they be watched over, should they sign the accords, should they be regulated or not. And they both, it's funny because they might have been on opposite ends of this if this was at the beginning, but because of the arcs both of the characters have gone through, where Steve has now learned to mistrust the government and understand how corrupt they are, and Tony now mistrusts himself because he's made so many mistakes and doesn't think he should be allowed to operate without supervision. Great stuff there. I love this movie. I love it. Introduction to Black Panther is phenomenal. I think Black Panther is better in this movie than he is in his own movie. I think the introduction to Spider-Man was a little bit shoehorned, but I enjoyed it anyway. So much great stuff in this movie, and every time I watch it, I just get taken on a roller coaster from start to finish. So next up is going to be Doctor Strange, and I like Doctor Strange. It's a solid movie. I'm on the B tier. Let's go just behind Ant-Man. It's a good movie. I don't think it's great. I think it definitely follows the MCU formula. I think especially with the fact that Doctor Strange and Tony Stark are very similar characters, and they go through very similar arcs in their two movies. But I enjoyed it. I thought the visuals were cool. I like the lore, and I like Kamar-Taj in general. I like that MCU went a different direction with the magic. Malekith was a pretty lame villain. I love Tilda Swinton as the Ancient One. I love Chiwetel Ejiofor as Mordo. I enjoyed the movie. Certainly not great, not top tier MCU definitely in that middle tier MCU, though. A lot of these are going to fall into this category for me. Doctor Strange, B tier. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, I'm going to put on... That's going to go on the C tier. On top of the C tier. This one is a bit frustrating for me because I like a lot of it. I like the characters again. I like the character interactions. I like the humor, some of it at least. I think some of the humor felt a little more forced and less organic than it did in the first movie. Don't love Ego as a villain. Now, a lot of people like him. I'm not really sure why, just because it's Kurt Russell maybe. But somehow they managed to make Kurt Russell boring for me. I just didn't really get into his character and plotline at all. The tone's a little bit inconsistent. I mean, they have the thing where he tells Peter that he was the one that killed his mom, and then right after that, they have a David Hasselhoff joke. It's like, that's not how you balance a tone. I mean, they did a much better job of that in the first movie. It almost feels like in this one, the James Gunn got a little bit too James Gunny with it. I enjoyed it, though. I overall think it's a solid movie. I don't think it's bad, necessarily, just very frustrating compared to the first one. I really love Yondu in this movie. He's the best part of the movie by far. I think the end of his arc, when he dies, is great. His funeral is great. Everything he goes through in this movie is phenomenal. Easily the best part of the movie was Yondu, and he had a very fitting ending as well. Didn't really care for the gold people, but I had a fun time watching this movie because I just love being in this world with these characters. Just a lot more flawed than the first one for me, so that's why it's on the C tier. The next one is going to be Spiderman Homecoming, which is going on the B tier. I'm going to put that right here. What the... Why can't I get it? There we go. Right here. Ahead of Ant-Man, below Age of Ultron. I've talked about Homecoming already in my Spider-Man tier list. I enjoy it. It's a very solid movie. It's a fun high school movie. It's funny. It's entertaining. I love Tom Holland's Peter Parker and Spider-Man. I love Tony Stark's inclusion, even though I don't love the technology that he gives Peter with the actual suit. Could have waited a little bit for that. I don't like that they jumped right into all this crazy technology for him to have. Would have liked a little bit more regular Spider-Man for a while. But the best part of this movie by far is Michael Keaton's Vulture. One of the best villains in the entire MCU. I've heard people say, I think Sean Chandler says, he's the Walter White of the MCU. He's just a guy who got screwed over and needed to make money, so he turned to crime. And ended up going a little bit too far and became a straight-up supervillain. But he's not a horrible guy. He wasn't. He was a construction worker, got screwed over by the government, by Tony Stark. So you can understand why he's doing what he's doing, just trying to support his family. That said, this movie doesn't have the best action. The third act in particular was pretty much a letdown. And it's very safe. It's a very safe movie. It's a bit of a palate cleanser. It's kind of like Ant-Man. It doesn't have the huge stakes of Civil War, Infinity War. It doesn't have the thematic themes. I know it's a weird way of saying it, but of Winter Soldier and Civil War and all that stuff. But it does exactly what it set out to do. Thor Ragnarok is next, which is going on the A tier. So far ahead of everything else in the A tier. I love Ragnarok. Ragnarok is phenomenal. It is easily my favorite Thor movie. And one of my favorite MCU movies. One of my best theater experiences of all time. Had so much fun with this movie from start to finish. It absolutely blew me away with how awesome it was. I saw the trailer. I'm like, this looks really cool. But they might mess up the tone a little bit. And there are times where they probably could have let the serious moments sit a little bit more before they injected some humor into it, which is a problem with the MCU in general. But that's about the only issue I have with the movie, is that sometimes they undercut the drama with humor. Aside from that, it is an absolute blast from start to finish. I love the music. I love Tessa Thompson's Valkyrie being introduced. I love Hela. I think she's one of the best MCU villains. I love Hulk's inclusion. I love all the action in this movie. It's very colorful, the vibrant colors. One of the most colorful and best looking MCU movies. So much. I love Jeff Goldblum. I mean, come on. Basically playing himself, but it was perfect for this role, for the Grandmaster. The Thor and Loki stuff. Everything in this movie was absolutely phenomenal. And the end credit scene that leads into Infinity War. So much fun, and one of my favorite MCU movies. Black Panther is also going on the A tier. I'm going to put the bottom of the A tier, and I'll explain why. It's a great movie. I love it. It was so important and so culturally relevant. and so important to so many people, which is awesome. I think the cast is all great. The performances are great. My only issue with that is that it feels like T'Challa had the show stolen from him a little bit by Killmonger and Letitia Wright's Shuri and Okoye. Feels like all those people, and M'Baku, of course, and M'Baku is one of my favorite characters in the entire MCU. All those people seem to have outshined Black Panther in his own movie a little bit, which is why I preferred him actually in Civil War. But it's great. Killmonger is one of my favorite villains in the entire MCU. It's a great story with deep themes. One of the most, no, that's not the right word. One of the most thematic of the MCU movies. One of the movies that'll make you think the most in the entire MCU. Don't love everything in the third act with the CGI, especially when they're falling, fighting each other. But the hand-to-hand action is great. Like on the cliff when they're fighting for the role of King. Awesome stuff there. All the visuals in this movie, aside from a little bit of shoddy CGI during the end battles there, great. The world of Wakanda is really cool. This is the first time we see it, so it has great world building. Claw is awesome in the time that he has in this movie. So much cool stuff. And I really, really love Black Panther. Though I don't think it's perfect, and I think it has a few issues here and there that keep it from being on the S tier or the top of the A tier for me. Infinity War is going on the S tier, ahead of everything else so far, even though I can't. There we go. I don't know why it's being so weird. I am obsessed with Infinity War. I was absolutely blown away by this movie. I can't think of a way that Infinity War could have been better than this. It's basically the perfect version of that type of movie. People have some issues with it, and I think a lot of the criticisms I see thrown at Infinity War are pretty dumb and don't really hold much water. I'll start with what I don't like about it, which is really only one thing. And that's early on in the movie. It can feel a little bit jarring, like there's a little bit too much going on, a little bit disjointed because there's so many different groups you have to keep bouncing back and forth between. It's like a half an hour before you get back to Tony and Doctor Strange and Peter, and by that point you're like, oh shit, I kind of forgot about them. Aside from that, and that fixes itself as the movie goes along. Aside from that, I love every single thing about this movie. This is everything I wanted and more. The cast is amazing. Seeing all these characters interact for the first time is phenomenal. It makes for some great humor that doesn't undercut the tension. Speaking of the tension, this movie has it certainly has a impending sense of doom and dread throughout the entire runtime. They don't really feel in any of the other MCU movies. And the reason for that is Thanos is a legit threat that you feel from the opening scene. They introduce him, and he kills off Heimdall and Loki and destroys the ship and almost kills Thor. And establishes right away the threat that Thanos is to our heroes. And like, no, this isn't your typical MCU movie. This is for real. Like, this guy's going to kill people. The stakes are real. And you feel that throughout the entire runtime. It never lets up. It is so well paced. And the ending is one of the best endings of any movie ever. And I understand that we knew all those people were coming back. That doesn't matter to me. It's about the ride. And it's about seeing the journey of getting them back and seeing the emotions of the characters around them and their journey and what they go through. That's the most important thing to me. Thanos won. He's the first person to really defeat the Avengers. And he's my favorite villain on this entire list. One of my favorite villains of all time. He was even a little bit sympathetic. He had some reasons for what he was doing that were totally fucked up, but also a little bit understandable. Just incredible. I couldn't have imagined him being that good. I was thinking before I saw the movie, it's like, it's going to be a lot of fun, but how the hell do you make Thanos into an interesting and compelling villain? And they did it. They did it in spades in this movie. He's the best character in the movie. He's the main character. Best villain on the list, and one of my favorites of all time. The action is great. I can't say enough amazing things about this movie. One of my favorite movies. It's in like my top 15 movies of all time. That's how great I think Infinity War is the Empire Strikes Back of our time. And most of the criticism I see leveled at it are ridiculous, even though it certainly isn't perfect. It's about as close to perfect as you can be for a movie like this, in my opinion. Just gonna grab a sip of water here. I've been going for a while. Ant-Man and the Wasp. That is going on the B tier. I actually slightly prefer it to the original Ant-Man, and I slightly prefer it to Homecoming. I love wouldn't quite say I love, but I really enjoy Ant-Man and the Wasp. I think it's just as fun, just as funny as the first one, but, had a little bit of a better pace. And the most important thing, the main reason I put this above the first one, is Hope is much better in this movie. She was pretty annoying in the first one. And watching it again, I kind of understand a little bit better where she's coming from. But she was a total badass, actually in the fight in this one, kicking ass, which is what we've been waiting for. It was awesome. Michael Pena is great again. Again, one of my favorite characters just because of how fucking funny he is. Ghost as a villain, I like it a little bit more than most people, but certainly could have been done better. Walton Goggins' character was terrible. I love him as an actor, but that was very, very generic and cliche and over the top. But I have so much fun with this movie from beginning to end, and also it has one of the best end credit scenes of any MCU movie. Again, another one that did exactly what it set out to do. Captain Marvel is going on the C tier between First Avenger and Thor. Captain Marvel is a decent, solid movie. I liked it. I gave it a positive review. I certainly think I'm mixed on Brie Larson in the role. She was a little bit better in Endgame, and I actually thought she was really good in the end credit scene of Shang-Chi, which is by far, I think, the most I've liked her. I know it was only for a couple minutes, but really enjoyed her appearance there. She was okay in this. I think certain aspects of her character she did better than others. I think she was a little bit better at the snarky, sarcastic stuff, because that's closer to what she's like in real life. When she has to get very emotional and loud and do some of the real deep emotional moments, doesn't really hit as well. So hopefully she works on that, and maybe it was the directing or writing. Speaking of writing, it seemed like there was too many cooks in the kitchen with this movie. They weren't exactly sure where they were going to take the story. It meandered a little bit at times and didn't seem like it was exactly sure what it was going to do. But there's some cool action, some cool visuals. DH Nick Fury is amazing. I can't believe how great he looks. I mean, it looked like they literally just plucked him out of the 90s, and you wouldn't even know. Like, if they told you they took footage of him in the 90s and put him in here instead of actually de-aging him, you wouldn't even, wouldn't even blink. Like, it would make total sense. You wouldn't even bat an eye. But yeah, that makes total sense. Don't like that their character is so OP without really going through that much of an arc. Just kind of gains all these powers out of nowhere, so hopefully they do something a little bit more interesting with her. The Jude Law stuff was fine. He did a good job in the role. I predicted he was going to be bad. What I didn't predict was that the Skrulls were going to be good, which was a very interesting storyline. And I love Ben Mendelsohn in the role because he's almost always this cliche, angry, yelling bad guy, which it seemed like he was going to be in this, and then he ends up actually being kind of a charming and funny good guy, which is a nice twist. And I like what they did with that. It was a good direction to take the movie, and I didn't expect that. I certainly expected Jude Law to be bad. I thought she'd have to fight both factions instead of one of them actually being good. So overall, it's a fine movie. I certainly enjoy watching it, but I think it's pretty flawed too. Endgame is going on the S tier. Guys, I know you're seeing a trend here. All 4 of the Russo movies are on the S tier. That's just how great they are. I mean, that's a testament to how great of directors they are. And also, all 4 movies are written by Marcus and McFeely, who are great writers. Endgame is amazing. I certainly don't think it's flawless, which is why I have it at the bottom of the S tier. I think it drags just a little bit in the second act, and some of the time travel stuff is a little bit iffy. I think they do a pretty good job with the time travel, given, everything they have to work with. It's tough to make time travel make total sense. I think the way that they explained it in the movie, they did a pretty good job with it, although there's a few things that don't quite add up. Performances are amazing. I love the first act where they're sitting with their loss and they scramble to try to figure out what they're going to do next to get everyone back, and the tiny glimmer of hope they get to get everyone back. I love Hawkeye in this movie. Definitely Renner's best performance and the best version of Hawkeye we've gotten so far in this franchise. Tony's great. Cap is great. Probably the best they've ever been. By far and away, Karen Gillan's best performance in the MCU. I finally started to like her in this movie. And she always annoyed me, especially in Guardians 1 and 2. She was okay in Infinity War. Loved her arc in this movie. The time travel stuff I thought was cool, but by far and away the highlight of the movie was the third act, this huge battle when everyone comes back, the portals, huge fight against Thanos and all of his minions. Didn't love Thanos as much in this movie, although I will defend his motivations to an extent because he saw the results of, him succeeding with his original plan, He's like, okay, so if you guys are going to be ungrateful and you're not going to take what I give you, I'm just going to destroy it all and start over. Given what happened, that makes sense to me. Certainly lost a little bit of the characterization that he had in the first one, but I was okay with it because of what happened. It seems like it's the natural progression for his character, even though he did seem a little bit like a mustache twirler in this one. I loved the fight between him, Cap, and Tony. Cap wielding Mjolnir. So many great moments. Natasha's death and then Tony's death were totally heartbreaking, but also made sense within the context of the movie, and we needed some sacrifices. We needed to lose some people in order to give everyone back to get this victory, so it worked that it was those two, and it was definitely fitting, even though it was very sad. Both of those deaths worked very well, and they were executed very well. The funeral at the end is great. Cap staying with Peggy. I know some people have issues with that. I'm totally fine with it, and I loved their dance at the end of the movie. This movie probably has the highest highs of any other MCU movie, with the amazing third act, with all these satisfying ends to character arcs, so many emotional moments. The stakes were high, great character interactions, so much great to say about this movie, and even though I certainly think it has a few flaws, that's why I put it below these three. Far From Home. Spider-Man Far From Home is going on the B tier. Let's put it right ahead of Ant-Man and the Wasp. I prefer it slightly to the first Spider-Man, to Homecoming, mainly because I think it has better visuals and a much better third act and better action overall. I like the story a little bit better. I think Mysterio's a great villain, not quite as good as Vulture. I don't even mind the exposition dump scene with Mysterio. I thought it kind of fit. I actually kind of enjoyed it. I thought it was fitting for the character. Where this movie loses me a little bit is the glasses plotline, which I think is easily the worst part of the movie, and I don't understand why they thought it was a good idea for Tony to leave these crazy, dangerous glasses with all the capabilities it has to a 16-year-old kid. You can literally drop a nuclear strike whenever you want, and he almost kills his friends on the bus, which is by far and away the worst scene in the movie. That whole idea with the glasses plotline is my biggest issue with the movie by far. Also, Mysterio, there's a little bit of a jump from disgruntled employee to willing to kill millions of people. That was a bit of a leap for me, a little bit of a logic leap, but I really had fun with this movie. I enjoyed Peter, his relationship with MJ. I like it better than Liz. I like him with her better than Liz. And again, Tom Holland is great in the role. Ned's awesome. I like Happy's inclusion. Lots of cool stuff about the movie, even though there's a couple things, especially the glasses plotline, that really, really frustrate me and keep it from being higher on this list. WandaVision, I'm going to put on the B tier, at the top of the B tier. It could have possibly been on the A tier, and it's close as teetering on that edge between the A and the B tier. But WandaVision is really cool. I think it's a unique idea, and I was really digging it at first when we weren't really sure what was going on. I love the intrigue and the mystery they were setting up. Once the actual reveals come in, a little bit underwhelming, but it also makes sense for the direction that Wanda's character goes in after everything she's gone through. Performances are all great. Paul Bettany, Elizabeth Olsen, Catherine Hahn as Agatha Harkness is phenomenal. She stole the show of the entire series, in my opinion. The the sword stuff, not great. Hayward was a very, very cliche, over-the-top government villain guy, and I didn't really enjoy him at all. Also, the last episode, I liked for the most part. I think certainly some things were a little bit rushed, but I enjoyed it. My favorite episode was the Halloween one. I think that was definitely the best episode. And I'm very interested to see where they go with Wanda, and I'm also very interested to see where they go with White Vision, because he had to talk with the other Vision, which was a great scene, where they talk about, basically, they're fighting each other, and it's like, wait, why are we fighting? It's like, I'm supposed to kill the Vision, but I'm not Vision. You're not Vision either. We're both parts of Vision, but neither one of us are the true Vision. That was one of my favorite parts of the show, and I'm sure we'll see him again at some point. Also, the tease at the end with Wanda screwing around with her powers and hearing her kids. They're going to do something with that, and Doctor Strange 2, which I'm very much looking forward to. I enjoyed the show. A little slow going, but I was digging it because of the intrigue. The reveal itself, slightly underwhelming, but I had a great... It made sense also, and I'm very interested to see where they go with Wanda in the future. Falcon and Winter Soldier, I'm going to put on the B tier as well. That's going to go right here. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good show. I like Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan in the roles. I enjoy Sam and Bucky's characters. And I think they both have interesting arcs in the movie. And by the end, the completion of their arcs is satisfying, even though there's a few things that certainly were rushed or underwhelming, such as the Flag Smashers. They never really ended up doing anything for me. The plot was a little bit messy throughout the entire show, and I've realized a little bit more after sitting on it for a little bit. But I enjoyed watching it, and there's certainly some good messages in here, even though they might not have been communicated in the best way at the end of the movie. I understood what they were doing, and I like it and respect it. Some fun action. I definitely love Zemo also, but I certainly feel like the story kind of lost itself, especially towards the end, and I didn't really care for the finale whatsoever. I don't really care for the Sharon Carter thing. I'll see where they go with her in the future, but it was painfully obvious to me and just wasn't very interesting. I just don't really buy that for her. But it makes sense for the direction of her character. So in the future, we'll see where it goes. John Walker was mixed for me. I think it was a potentially interesting character arc, but I think they certainly botched certain things to do with it. The moment where he killed the guy was really interesting. When he fought Bucky and Sam, great fight. Where they went with him after that with the quick redemption and then unredemption, a little bit weird, but I certainly understand what they're going for, and the performance was great as well. So Falcon and Winter Soldier, even though I have some frustrations with it, I did enjoy it, and it's on the B tier. Loki is going to be the first show on the A tier, and that's going to go... I'm going to put it at the bottom of the A tier. I'm not going to quite put it in the same conversation as Black Panther and Iron Man, but very solid show. It's my favorite MCU show so far. I think it was the most consistent and the best pacing and most efficiently delivered on its themes and messages and its vision, what exactly it was trying to do. I think ended up delivering that the best out of all these shows. I love Tom Hiddleston as Loki. He kind of has another version of the arc we've already gotten from him in the MCU in this movie. And I love Owen Wilson also. Everything he's in is great, but this is one of my favorite roles of his ever, maybe my favorite. Sylvie was enjoyable. I liked the Kang stuff at the end. A lot of people had issues with the finale scene. It was basically just exposition setting up the second season. I understand that, but I was somewhat okay with it because for something like this, it was kind of necessary to me. It's Kang. I mean, it's going to be really cool to see him in the MCU going forward. I can't wait what they do with him because he's a very, very dangerous villain with his ability to mess with time and everything. But I really enjoyed Loki. There was some fun action, great character moments, some great themes in here about free will versus determinism. Dug all that. Every conversation between him and Owen Wilson's character, Mobius, was really cool. So, and where their characters end up as well, except for the very end, which is a little bit sad when everyone doesn't know who he is. But I really enjoyed the show, my favorite MCU show so far.
Wow.
So next is Black Widow, which is going to go on the B tier. I'm going to put it behind Far From Home, but ahead of Ant-Man and the Wasp. I really like Black Widow. It's certainly not great. By far and away, the weakest point of this movie is the villains and the third act. The main villain, who's behind everything, Ray Winstone, I can't remember, Dreykov, and then also Taskmaster, both very underwhelming. Dreykov is very, very cliche and over the top and almost cartoonish, and Taskmaster didn't really end up doing anything except for one cool fight, and the character reveal didn't do anything for me for who it actually is. Just a very underwhelming villain that a lot of people were really looking forward to, a really cool villain from the comics. Third act ended up being a pretty cliche MCU third act. Aside from that, everything about this movie was pretty damn good. I love ScarJo in the role, but she kind of had to show stolen from her by Florence Pugh's Yelena, who was absolutely great. She was great again in Hawkeye. Such a fun, charismatic character, and I can't wait to see her again in the MCU. We also have David Harbour, who was totally awesome. Easily, him and Florence were the best parts of this movie. Harbour was such a fun and funny character to be around, and he stole every scene he was in, unless Florence was in there too, then they were fighting for it. But the themes of family in here are very present and very well done. I would say better than the Fast and Furious movies. Sorry. But I enjoyed that aspect of it. I certainly enjoy, some of the backstory of the Black Widows and how we figure out more about how they became who they are. And there's a little bit of a montage at the beginning of the movie where a different version of Smells Like Teen Spirit plays, which is amazing. The best opening credits of the entire MCU. My jaw was on the floor during that. Also, some cool action in here. It's a fun spy thriller. I had a lot of fun with this movie, even though certainly not great, and fell into some of the typical MCU traps with mediocre villains, putting it nicely, as well as a very underwhelming third act. What if I'm going to put on the C tier? Let's go right here. I don't have a ton to say about What If. It was fine. Certainly enjoyed a few episodes. The Doctor Strange one is still my favorite episode of the show, and we might be seeing more of that character now that we've seen the Doctor Strange 2 trailer, so can't wait for that. That was an incredible episode. The last two, where everyone comes together and fights Ultron, there was some good stuff there. I love the idea of Ultron becoming super powerful, but the way they actually defeat him and everything goes on didn't do a ton for me. And all the other episodes, some cool and funny ideas, I just found myself never really that interested. So I think it was a fun idea. It just didn't ever really do that much for me, aside from maybe 2 or 3 episodes. The rest of them I can really do without. Especially the Peggy Carter one and the Thor Party one and the Killmonger one. None of those did anything very interesting for me that were different enough and unique enough to where it felt like it warranted actually doing these episodes, and I feel like I'd want to watch them again. It was disappointing overall, fun idea, but I can't see myself ever rewatching any of these except for the Doctor Strange one, so that's not a good indication of how good the show is, but I give it points for its creativity. Shang-Chi is definitely going on the B tier, and I'm going to put that, I'm going to put it right here. Below Age of Ultron, ahead of Falcon and Winter Soldier. I think Shang-Chi is awesome. I am not quite as over the moon about it as some people are, mainly because I did not really care for the third act. It kind of went away from what the rest of the movie was. It turned into a cliche CGI MCU battle with all the mythical creatures and stuff, even though they looked cool. The message of the movie kind of got lost in that a little bit. Everything else was great. All the other action, the hand-to-hand fights, the main character, the storyline with the main character and his dad. His dad is absolutely awesome in the movie, one of the best villains in the entire MCU. Just such an amazing, deep, fleshed out character. You completely understand where he's coming from, even though he's certainly doing some despicable things and he needs to be stopped. Some very, very cool, I think I've already talked about the action, the hand-to-hand fighting, but then also the stuff involving the magic stuff they use with the bracelets and everything. Some good humor in here. I had a blast with this movie, and it's definitely unique. We've never really seen an MCU movie like this before. Some of the stuff with the Asian culture was really cool. So much fun with Shang-Chi, even though I'm not quite as obsessed with it as some people, because my main issue with it was the third act, and it was kind of starting to lose me by that point, but everything else was great. Eternals, I'm going to put on the B tier as well. That's going to go ahead of Black Widow, ahead of Far From Home. Do I go ahead of Falcon and Winter Soldier? I'm going to say no. I'm going to keep Falcon and Winter Soldier between Shang-Chi and Eternals. But I thought Eternals was awesome. I certainly don't think it's great or perfect, but the people that hate on this movie and think it's bad, I do not understand that for the life of me. And there are a lot of them, too, people that I like and respect and I'm friends with, and a lot of reviewers out there that I like the most. Like, some of the reviewers that I trust and tend to agree with the most don't like this movie. do not understand that at all. I had a good time with Eternals. I think almost all of these characters are great, and they get you to care about so many different characters and their storylines and their relationships with each other in a matter of 2.5 hours, however long the movie is. That's very impressive that they were able to do that. Some people said they didn't care about the characters. I don't understand that. I thought this movie did the best job of any of the origin stories or first time we're seeing characters of making you care about them in one single movie. Obviously, we care more about Tony Stark and Captain America and Spider-Man over the course of several movies. But as far as one movie goes, it did the best job of getting you to care about all these characters. So that was amazing. Thought the performances were all great. Gemma Chan, even though she is the main character, it's an ensemble, but she's definitely the main character. She was fine. I wasn't blown away by her like I was with some of the other characters. A little bit robotic, a little bit dull to me, but I still like her, and I still like her character. Some very, very cool action and visuals in this movie. Certainly is one of the better looking MCU movies. One of the most thematic. It certainly got some very deep themes. Where the movie goes wrong is the story structure. It can be tough to get into the movie at times because of the way that they tell the story with the nonlinear storytelling. It's in the things they choose to show before they show you certain things. It's like, why couldn't you have done this a little bit more with this before you showed us that? A little bit strange there, and that can be tough. Make it tough for some people to get into the movie. But other than that, I thought it was a very solid film. Certainly not great, and it didn't have to be as long as it was. It's not the best paced MCU movie, but it's very deep, very emotional, and has some very cool action, so that's why it's on the B tier. Hawkeye is going on the B tier as well, ahead of WandaVision. I really enjoyed Hawkeye from start to finish. I know a lot of people had issue with the finale for one reason or another. First of all, spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Kingpin's not dead. He's not dead. There's a reason they cut away and didn't show him dying. Even if he had gotten shot on screen, he probably still wouldn't be dead. Trust me, they're not going to bring him into the MCU and kill him off just like that. There's absolutely zero chance he's dead. Other than that, I really enjoyed the finale. I enjoyed the last 4 episodes in particular. The first 2, a little bit iffy. It took a while for it to get going. And you're like, okay, this seems more like a Kate Bishop show, which I'm fine with. A lot of people at issue, oh, it's called Hawkeye. So what? We know it's a passing of the torch show. It's going to be about both of them, and we're going to learn about Kate's backstory. It becomes more of the Hawkeye show in the next few episodes, which is good, and it's what it promised. But I love Kate Bishop. I love Yelena's inclusion. The interactions they had with each other were great, and I can't wait to see what both of them do in the future of the MCU. Clint and Kate had a great relationship, and it evolves throughout the show. In the first couple episodes, Clint's kind of like, oh, I don't really want to do this. And it gets a little bit old, but then he ends up helping her, and things get a lot more interesting and better, and there's a fun storyline. I think my favorite episode is still the penultimate, the one that's before the finale. I think it was very intense, and I love the way that he went out there and basically showed his boss and beat up all these people, but didn't kill him. He doesn't kill anymore. And he told Echo about everything, and he's like, stay away from me and my family or I'm going to kill you. And he told her about the truth with Kingpin and everything. Lots of great stuff there. The finale, I love Wilson Fisk, especially played by Vincent D'Onofrio. It felt a little bit different than the Daredevil one, which makes sense because I'm pretty sure it's a different version of the character. Now, I know he's made some comments. Read the comments a little bit more carefully. I think what he's saying is he's playing the character in a very similar way. But the most important line from that interview, in my opinion, is when he says, obviously certain things can't carry over. Something along those lines. That should be a dead giveaway right there. That's not the same character. Not the exact same character. That the Netflix stuff isn't canon. That's just what I take away from it. Certainly other people have different opinions on it. But when I read that statement, that's what I get out of it, and that's what I think he meant. Could be wrong, but watching this episode, I have a hard time believing that this is the exact same character as the Netflix one. Still enjoyed the performance. I kind of went off on a tangent there. I'm sorry. Some very cool action in the show. I like that it's set around Christmas time. I enjoyed Hawkeye. It was a fun little show, and I don't know if they're going to have season 2, but there's going to be the Echo show, which Should be interesting. I mean, her character didn't do that much for me like it did for some people, but I'm certainly interested to see where she goes next, especially if Wilson Fisk and Vincent D'Onofrio returns for that show, which I'm almost certain he will. Hawkeye, had hell of a time with it. It's my second favorite MCU show so far. No Way Home is going on the A tier, and that's going to be right here. Below Guardians, but above the Avengers. I just saw No Way Home for the second time a couple days ago. I talked about it already in my spoiler-free and spoiler-filled reviews, and also my Spider-Man tier list, how much I love this movie. I loved it even more the second time. I moved it up a little bit. Beforehand, this would have been probably below Black Panther. Now it's above the Avengers. A lot of the stuff, a lot of the emotional moments hit better for me the second time. A lot of the character interactions, I was just fully able to sit back and take everything in without being so overwhelmed. And I was able to appreciate it even more the second time. Spoilers for this movie in 3, 2, 1. Tobey and Andrew are great. This might be the best they've ever been as these characters. I think all 3 Spider-Men give their best performance as the character, which is amazing. From the moment those two come into the movie, everything from the rest of the movie on is great, except for small nitpicks I have about some of the semantics of the spell. But all the interactions they have, how the other two basically talk Tom down and say, no. This is what we do. You did the right thing. Ant-Man didn't die for no reason. We have to do this. We have to cure them all. And they basically reminded him of why he's Spider-Man. This is Tom Holland's Spider-Man origin story. They didn't skip it. It just took 3 movies to tell it. And Ant-Man basically becomes his Uncle Ben, which I absolutely love. A lot of people were complaining that this Spider-Man was kind of missing something. He was missing the loss and the adversity and the lessons that make him Spider-Man. We get it in this movie. So it ends up being a 3-movie origin story, which is kind of surprising to some people, but I dug it. And this is by far and away the best MCU Spider-Man movie because it certainly has the highest stakes. It's the most emotional. Tom Holland Spider-Man has the best arc. It's his best performance in the entire MCU. All the returning villains are great, especially Green Goblin, Doc Ock, and Electro, who is much better in this movie than he was in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So much great stuff. So much great action. Third act in particular was amazing. All the interactions between the 3 Spider-Men were incredible. They both funny and serious. All landed. Some of the best humor in the entire MCU. But the one issue I have that keeps it in the A tier and not the S tier for me is the entire inciting incident involving the spell and Doctor Strange being so careless with it. Both of these guys being very careless, but Strange in particular. I mean, this guy's a master of the mystic arts, and he is shockingly he's shockingly careless, and it's very, very weird when I watch this movie and I think, why is he acting like this? And I saw a trailer, I'm like, oh, that's probably a Skrull, right? This is someone else in disguise. It's not. It's the real Doctor Strange. So it was very weird to me that he acted like this, and he's acted very inconsistently throughout. You've heard me talk about this throughout the entire MCU, especially in this movie. How do you not talk to Peter beforehand about the specific parameters of the spell and what you want to do? Then once you figure that out, don't bring him in the fucking room with you if it's so easy to fuck up by him saying stuff. So nonchalant and careless about it. It was very shocking to see that from a character like Doctor Strange. He also gets defeated by Peter in the mirror dimension. A lot of weird stuff there. And the idea that Peter didn't call to appeal the decision and Doctor Strange got mad at him about it, but he didn't ask him about that beforehand. Everything to do with that was weird. Everything else, aside from a few of the issues I have with the final spell as well, was incredible. I love this movie from start to finish, and it worked even better when I watched it for the second time a few days ago. So it's on the A tier. So there you have it, guys. That is my tier list for the entire MCU, all 32 movies and shows. So just to run through my ranking again, going from 32 to 1, 32, Iron Man 3, 31, The Incredible Hulk, 30, Thor the Dark World, 29, Iron Man 2, 28, Thor, 27, Captain Marvel, 26, Captain America the First Avenger, 25, What If, 24, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, 23, Doctor Strange, 22, Ant-Man, 21, Spiderman Homecoming, 20, Ant-Man and the Wasp, 19, Black Widow. 18, Spider-Man Far From Home. 17, Eternals. 16, The Falcon and Winter Soldier. 15, Shang-Chi. 14, Avengers Age of Ultron. 13, WandaVision. 12, Hawkeye. 11, Loki. 10, Black Panther. 9, Iron Man. 8, The Avengers. 7, Spider-Man No Way Home. 6, Guardians of the Galaxy. 5, Thor Ragnarok. 4, Avengers Endgame. 3, Captain America the Winter Soldier. 2, Captain America Civil War. And 1, Avengers Infinity War. So, there you have it, guys. That is my ranking for all 32 MCU movies and shows. How do you rank these movies? What tiers would you put them on? What do you agree with me on? What do you disagree with me on? I'm sure there's going to be some disagreements. If any two people on the planet have the same exact ranking of all 32 of these, I would be shocked. So let's start a conversation down below. Let's talk about it. And guys, if you enjoy my content, please subscribe. Please hit the notification bell to get notified when I post a video. If you like this video, please hit the like button. It's very, very helpful for my YouTube channel. And I got some more stuff coming. I certainly got my end of the year lists and some other new fun stuff I have planned. I should be able to actually, I've been saying that for a while, I should be able to actually film those and get those out now at some point. So stay tuned for that. Take care, guys, and I will see you soon.